They say memory is unreliable, that it rearranges itself in the mind with each retelling, smoothing the sharp edges of pain, making monsters smaller or larger than they ever were. But there are nights I wake up clawing at my sheets, sweat drying cold on my back, and I know exactly how it happened. My brother's voice, raised behind a door I was forbidden to open. The unblinking gaze of men in expensive suits, their signet rings catching the light as they thumbed through a pile of envelopes. My mother's hand on my shoulder, the pressure just a little too firm, the message clear: you do not belong here. There was a November evening I can't forget. The city was gripped by rain, pavement shining black beneath street lamps, and I stood just inside the old front hall of the house I grew up in, water pooling at my feet. The hush in the air wasn't peace, it was the kind of silence that blooms after a scream, the vacuum left behind by words I'd been told I could never take back. A faint echo of laughter drifted from the dining room, then died. I was supposed to be gone. I wasn't supposed to see what I saw. My name is Paul Rourke. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my life, I have played the role of the other son in my family's private theater. I work as a history teacher at a state school in London, a job I'm proud of even if no one else in the family considers it worth mentioning. I rent a flat in Kilburn, eat dinner at my desk, and watch the months slide past with a kind of resigned acceptance. This is the story of how everything I trusted, family, brotherhood, the meaning of loyalty, fell apart, and of what I did when I couldn't take it anymore. People imagine families like mine are twisted only in the obvious ways: screaming matches over inheritances, drunken Christmases, stray fists breaking the hush. But that was never our way. The Rourke family radiated an unspoken, almost smug, composure. My father died when I was 15, leaving behind a house full of secrets, and my mother, Judith, who ruled the world through calm judgment. My older brother, Thomas, was always the golden boy: Oxford, then law, then a partnership at a private firm with clients that didn't show up in the news. I was the spare. The one who read too much, spoke too little, and learned early that being invisible was safer. For years, I accepted my supporting role. Thomas was given the family's best: money for travel, introductions to the right people, a circle of friends whose parents talked about networking the way other people talk about the weather. I got careful praise when I brought home good marks, but when I announced I'd accepted a scholarship at a state university instead of following Thomas to Oxford, my mother pursed her lips and said, "Well, you've always done things your own way, haven't you?" There was no malice in her voice. That was the worst of it. Love withheld, not as punishment, but as policy. I had my own life. My students, my books, friends who'd never heard the name Rourke until I let it slip at a pub. Still, there was a gravitational pull back to the house on Brixton Hill, especially as my mother's health began to waver. I visited on Sundays, brought groceries, tried to make light conversation with Judith as she let her eyes linger on the empty chair at the table, Thomas's, always waiting. He was busy, always busy, but somehow managed to be the first person she called when the boiler broke, when the solicitor needed a signature, when the bank called about her accounts. It was on one of those Sunday visits that I first noticed the change. My mother's phone, usually left on the kitchen counter, was clutched tight in her lap. She started locking the front door after I arrived, twisting the deadbolt with a practiced flick. She'd bristle when I asked simple questions: "How are you sleeping?" or "Is there anything I can help with?" I chalked it up to the indignities of aging, the way pride clings to dignity as the body fails. But then there were phone calls that ended the moment I walked into the room, envelopes addressed to her in looping script I didn't recognize, and a parade of unfamiliar visitors, men and women in discreet, expensive clothes, who left quickly when they saw me. Thomas had always been secretive about his work. He said little, offering explanations that hovered just this side of plausible. Consultations, he'd say. Private clients. Investment advice. I didn't press. I told myself it was none of my business. Even as his visits to our mother became more frequent, his presence more authoritative. The last time we all ate together, Thomas spoke in clipped, knowing sentences about opportunities that would secure the family for decades. Judith's face shone with pride. I tried to follow the conversation, but it was like trying to read a coded letter without the key. I tried not to resent him. It wasn't his fault, We were cast in these roles by our mother, by the world. But there was a strange ritualistic quality to Thomas's absences and returns, and the way Judith deferred to him, that began to unsettle me. On the rare occasions he spoke directly to me, it was with a kind of gentle condescension. "Still teaching, Paul?" he'd ask, as if I might have grown out of it. "No chance of trading up to an academy, maybe?" I'd smile, say nothing, and pour myself a drink. It was a Friday evening when it began to unravel, or maybe the thread had been tugged loose for years and I just didn't see it. I arrived at the house to drop off some prescription refills for my mother, expecting to find her dozing in front of the telly. Instead, I found the front hall full of strangers, 6 or 7 men and women, all dressed with the studied carelessness of people who never worry about money. A hush fell as I entered. Thomas was there, too, standing at the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes flicking over the assembly. He barely acknowledged me. My mother's eyes widened, a flash of something like panic crossing her face before she composed herself. "Paul, you should have called first," she said, her voice brittle. "I just came by too. We're in the middle of something. Perhaps you could wait in the kitchen." I stood there, rain dripping from my coat, the stranger's eyes pinning me to the wall. I'd never been excluded so openly, not even as a child. I left the prescription bottle on the console table and went into the kitchen, ears straining for any clue. The murmur of voices drifted through the door, punctuated by laughter that didn't sound like my mother's. I waited. 10 minutes, 20. When I tried to return to the hall, the door was locked. I pressed my ear to the wood, heart pounding, and caught fragments: charity trust, initiation, new funding round, circle of confidence. Words that meant nothing and everything, the kind of language people use when they want to sound important while saying nothing at all. When the door finally opened, the visitors were gone, and my mother's face was a mask. "Don't come by unannounced again, Paul," she said. "It's not fair to Thomas." I left, the click of the lock behind me echoing in my skull. After that night, everything shifted. I was no longer welcome at the house except by prior arrangement. My mother's texts became clipped and formal. Calls went unanswered. And Thomas became a presence everywhere and nowhere at once. I saw him occasionally in the city, always in the company of certain men and women, always moving with purpose. There were rumors in the papers of a new, private philanthropic circle making waves in London, raising millions for causes close to the heart of Britain's future. I recognized some of the names: minor aristocrats, a controversial MP, the kind of people who'd never have spoken to someone like me. I heard about the society, the Order of St. Alban, first from a colleague at work, who joked that it sounded like a cult for bankers. "They're everywhere lately," she said, "throwing money at art galleries and politicians, always in these little black tie groups." I laughed it off. But the next week, when I saw a photo of Thomas on the society's website, flanked by men in tailored suits and women in pearls, something in me snapped. I tried to talk to my mother. She refused to meet me alone. When I pressed her, she became angry, then withdrawn. "Thomas is doing what's best for all of us," she said. "You could have been part of it, if only you'd listened." It was the same old script, the golden child, the disappointment. But this time, there was something darker behind it. Money, yes, but something else, a kind of power that thrived on secrecy. Months passed. I focused on my students, buried myself in lesson plans, tried to ignore the gnawing sense of being watched. I convinced myself it was paranoia. But then I lost my debit card, twice. My email account was hacked. A few nights, I came home to find the door to my flat ajar, nothing missing but a faint residue of someone having been there. I told myself it was the wind, or a careless landlord. But I started to wonder if I had ever truly understood my family at all. The final blow came in late spring. I received a letter from my mother's solicitor, summoning me to the reading of her will. She died, suddenly, a stroke that took her in the night. The funeral was small, mostly Thomas's friends and associates. I was given a seat at the back, next to people I didn't recognize. The eulogy was delivered by one of the society's members, a man I'd never met, who spoke of Judith's dedication to the order's ideals and her legacy of discretion. Thomas wept performatively, then shook hands with everyone but me. The will was read in a room that smelled of old paper and aftershave. It was simple. The house, the accounts, the investments, everything went to Thomas, in recognition of his leadership and commitment to the order's principles. I was left a box of books and a letter, both of which I'd never seen before. I opened the letter later, alone in my flat. It was short, written in my mother's careful script. Paul. You always saw things others didn't. I wish you could have seen how important this work is. Trust your brother. He'll look after everything. Mother. That was the moment I realized I'd been written out, not just of the will, but of the family itself. My role had never been to inherit. It was to watch, to witness, to absorb the fractures so the golden child could shine unblemished. But now the fractures were all that remained. I spent days drifting through the routines of my life, numb with loss and fury. But beneath the grief, another feeling simmered, a cold, hard determination to find out what Thomas had really been doing, and why I'd been so methodically erased. I started by researching the Order of St. Alban. Their website was a model of vagueness, mission statements about social renewal, lists of philanthropic partners, no mention of actual projects. I dug deeper, turning to Companies House and the Charities Commission, searching for any sign of assets. There were dozens of shell companies registered at the same address as the Order's headquarters in Mayfair. All recently incorporated. All with directorships that rotated among the same 8 or 9 names, Thomas's among them. The books I'd inherited from my mother held more than I expected. Some were first editions, inscribed to Judith from names I'd found in my searches. At the bottom of the box was a slim volume bound in maroon leather, no title on the spine. Inside, careful notes, meeting dates, lists of attendees, coded references to funding cycles and initiation rounds. My mother's handwriting again, neat and unemotional, recording the names of donors and recipients, the flow of money through the Order's labyrinth. One name came up again and again: Circle of Friends Fund, administered personally by Thomas, moving tens of thousands of pounds at a time to accounts in Luxembourg and the Isle of Man. The more I read, the clearer it became, this wasn't charity. This was a machine for laundering influence, consolidating power, and rewarding loyalty with money siphoned from God knows where. I gathered the evidence: screenshots, copies of company filings, excerpts from the Maroon Ledger. I tried to go to the police, but the detective who took my statement seemed almost bored. Family trusts are complicated, he said. Unless you can show criminal intent, he left the sentence unfinished. I tried to talk to former members of the Order. Most refused to respond. One woman, a former accountant, agreed to meet me in a cafe near Victoria Station, her eyes darting to the door every few minutes. She told me, in a low voice, that the Order punished dissent ruthlessly. They destroy reputations, careers. Sometimes worse, she said. Your brother, he's one of the inner circle. You won't get far. I nearly gave up. But then, late one night, I received an anonymous email, no subject, a single line: check the grant applications, May 2018. There was an attachment, a scan of an internal Order memo, outlining a special funding round that benefited only Thomas's companies. It was enough to suggest fraud, if I could prove the money's origin. The next weeks were a blur. I combed through public records, traced payments from the Order's charities to Thomas's shell companies, and cross-referenced them with tax filings. It was slow, tedious work, but I'd spent years grading essays and cross-checking sources. I knew how to find patterns in chaos. I tried once more to contact Thomas, to give him a chance to explain, to at least acknowledge me. He refused to take my calls. When I went to visit him at his office, the receptionist told me he wasn't available. The next day, I found a letter slipped under my flat door, no return address, only the Order's seal embossed in gold. Paul. You are grieving, and I understand your confusion. It's best for everyone if you let this go. I have always acted in the family's interest. Tr. That was the moment I stopped being afraid. I realized that the worst had already happened, They'd taken everything from me, even my name. I had nothing left to lose. I compiled a dossier, documents, timelines, bank records, extracts from my mother's ledger. I reached out to an investigative journalist I'd met years before, a former student's mother who'd covered financial misconduct in the city. I told her everything, showed her the evidence, trusted her to know what to do. She worked quietly, verifying my findings, following the money. It took months, but eventually a story broke in the weekend edition of The Observer: secret society's charity scheme under investigation, millions in family funds diverted. There were photos of Thomas, of the Order's Mayfair headquarters, of the shell company's directors. The story was careful, avoiding accusations but raising enough questions that regulators had to take notice. Within days, the Order's website went offline. Anonymous sources confirmed that key members were under investigation for financial misconduct. Thomas resigned from his firm to focus on personal matters. His name disappeared from charity boards, from company registers. The Order's inner circle began to fracture, each member scrambling for cover. There was no dramatic confrontation, no tearful confession. I never saw Thomas again. A solicitor contacted me to say that the house on Brixton Hill was being sold to cover unforeseen tax liabilities. I was offered a small settlement, enough to pay off my student loans, not enough to buy loyalty or silence. I took it. I moved to a different flat, farther from the city, and tried to build something like peace from the fragments of my old life. I wish I could say it healed me. But revenge, I learned, is a kind of wound you keep reopening, not because you want the pain, but because it's the only proof that it happened at all. I still teach, and sometimes I see my mother's face in the quiet girls at the back of the classroom, the ones who know that being invisible is safer. I don't try to save them. I just try to see them. Sometimes, in the gray hour before dawn, I wonder what would have happened if I'd played my assigned role, if I'd been content to orbit Thomas's light. But I wasn't made for that. I was made to witness, to remember, and, finally, to act. I walk quieter now. I carry the cost of my choices everywhere. But at least I know, in the end, I refuse to let my family's secrets define me. That's enough. It has to be.